Daniel never imagined that his quiet assignment would change his life forever. He was only an engineer, sent by Earth Command to a distant colony where the communication towers often broke down. His job was simple: check the circuits, replace broken parts, and report back when everything was working. Most of the time, the work was lonely. The colony was far from the main trade routes, and humans were rare in this region of space. On the day everything changed, Daniel had just finished repairing a damaged relay. He walked back toward the main hall of the alien city, his toolkit still slung over his shoulder. The city was unlike anything he had ever seen: tall crystal spires that caught the sunlight and reflected it across the streets, wide bridges of stone that floated above rivers of blue water, and banners that moved on their own as if alive. It was beautiful, but also intimidating. He had been told there would be a diplomatic gathering that evening. Important leaders from different clans of the alien kingdom were coming together to meet their queen. Daniel was not supposed to be part of it. He only wanted to return the tools and maybe grab a quiet meal before heading back to his quarters. But as he entered the great hall, the guards closed the doors behind him. The hall was enormous, its ceiling so high it looked like the sky itself had been trapped inside. Long tables were set with strange foods that shimmered with faint light. Warriors stood in rows, their armor shining silver and green. Nobles sat in silence, their eyes sharp and curious. A sudden hush fell over the room as the queen entered. Daniel felt his chest tighten. She was taller than most, graceful yet commanding. Her crown was not metal but living vines that glowed faintly, and her eyes seemed to shine like twin stars. Her presence filled the hall in a way that made even her strongest warriors bow deeply. Daniel froze in place, not sure if he should bow too. He was just an engineer, not a soldier, not a noble. But before he could decide, the queen's gaze moved across the hall and stopped on him. Every alien head turned to follow her eyes. Whispers began to rise in the crowd. Daniel felt sweat forming at the back of his neck. Why was she staring at him? He looked behind, thinking maybe someone else had walked in, but there was no one. The queen stepped forward, her long robe gliding across the polished floor. She raised her hand and pointed directly at him. Her voice carried like music yet commanded silence. "This is my husband," she declared. Gasps filled the chamber. Nobles leaned forward, eyes wide with shock. Warriors stiffened, some looking at each other in confusion. Advisors quickly whispered among themselves. The entire hall trembled with disbelief. Daniel nearly dropped his toolkit. His heart raced so fast he thought it might stop. "Husband." He opened his mouth to protest, but the words would not come out. He could only stand there, caught in the center of every gaze. The queen smiled. It was not a cruel smile, nor a playful one. It was calm, as if she had simply revealed something that was always meant to be. Her eyes softened for a moment, and then she turned to her advisors as if her words had settled the matter. Daniel wanted to speak, to explain that this was a mistake. He was not a warrior, not a prince, not anyone important. He was just Daniel from Earth, who knew how to fix broken machines. But his throat felt dry. He could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. One of the nobles stood, his voice sharp. "Your Majesty, what is this? A human? You claim him as your husband?" The queen did not flinch. She raised her chin, her smile never fading. "Yes," she said firmly. "This is the one I have chosen." The whispers turned louder. Some voices were mocking, others angry, but some carried curiosity. A few even sounded fearful. Daniel's legs felt weak, but he forced himself to stand straight. He knew one wrong move could be dangerous. The guards had their hands on their weapons, watching him carefully. The queen's smile returned as she looked back at him. Her eyes told him something he did not understand, something hidden. It was as though she knew him, even though they had never spoken before. The feast continued in uneasy silence, but Daniel's mind raced. Why had she chosen him? Was this some kind of political trick? Was she using him to make a point to her people? Or was there something more behind her words? As the hall filled again with voices and music, Daniel remained frozen in place, feeling as if the ground beneath him had shifted forever. The Queen's declaration had changed everything. The great hall remained restless even after the Queen's bold words. Whispers moved like a wave through the nobles, each voice carrying doubt, anger, or surprise. Daniel stood frozen, unable to believe what had just happened. He wanted to speak, to say it was all a mistake, but his mouth stayed shut. He felt as if every eye in the room had locked onto him, weighing him down with judgment. Queen Illyra remained calm. She sat upon her throne with the confidence of someone who had planned this moment long before. Her smile was steady, her gaze firm. She acted as if there was nothing strange about naming a human a simple engineer as her husband in front of her people. The nobles began to question her openly. One stepped forward, his robe decorated with golden lines that marked his high status. His voice was sharp, like a blade cutting the air. "Your Majesty, this cannot be serious. You claim a human, a stranger, as your chosen mate? Do you expect us to accept this?" Illyra turned her head slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You will accept what I decide. My choice is guided not by chance but by the will of the stars." Murmurs filled the air again. Daniel stood awkwardly, still clutching his toolkit like a shield. He wished the ground would open up and swallow him. He was not meant to be part of this. He was supposed to fix machines, not stand beside queens. Two guards moved toward him and placed their hands firmly on his shoulders. They guided him forward, closer to the throne. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, but he dared not resist. The Queen watched carefully, her smile never fading, though there was something behind her eyes, a silent message that he could not understand. When he stood at the foot of the throne, Illyra raised her hand. "This human will be treated with the honor of my chosen," she said. "He is not a prisoner, but a partner." The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. Some nobles whispered angrily, others looked at Daniel with suspicion. A few, however, seemed curious. They had heard stories of humans, beings from distant worlds known to survive on harsh planets, stronger and stranger than most races could endure. Daniel finally found his voice. "Your Majesty," he said softly, careful not to anger her, "I think there has been a misunderstanding. I am not. I mean, I am not anyone important. I'm just here to fix your systems." The Queen's eyes met his, and her smile grew sharper. "There is no misunderstanding," she replied in a voice only he could hear. "Play your part, or neither of us will survive this night." Daniel's blood ran cold. He opened his mouth to question her, but she had already turned her attention back to the hall. She waved her hand, and musicians began to play again. The tension did not vanish, but the ceremony continued, forced forward by her command. Throughout the evening, Daniel was made to sit near the throne. Servants brought him food, though he was too nervous to eat. Nobles approached, speaking in polite tones but asking sharp questions. "From what world do you come? What strength does your kind hold? What deeds make you worthy of her choice?" Daniel stumbled through his answers, trying to remain respectful. He said he came from Earth, a planet far from this system. He explained that he was an engineer, skilled with machines. He admitted he had no warrior's training, no noble title. Some nobles laughed quietly at his honesty, while others looked disturbed. The Queen, however, defended him at every turn. "Do not mistake humility for weakness," she told them. "Humans are more than they seem." By the end of the night, Daniel's head was spinning. The feast ended, the nobles departed, and the hall emptied until only guards remained. Daniel tried again to speak to Illyra, but she stood and motioned for him to follow her. She led him through winding corridors, past tall windows that revealed the city lights below. Finally, they entered her private chamber, a room filled with soft light and the scent of flowers. She turned to face him, her smile gone at last. "You must listen," she said quietly. "I did not choose you at random. My throne is under threat. Enemies circle like vultures, waiting for me to appear weak. By naming you, I created a shield. They will hesitate now, unsure what power you truly hold." Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "But I don't have any power. I'm just a man who fixes machines." Her eyes locked onto his, firm and unyielding. "Then you must learn. If you deny me, they will kill you and me as well. But if you stand by me, even as a symbol, you may save us both." Daniel's stomach tightened. He never asked for this, never wanted to be part of alien politics. But the look in her eyes was not one of a schemer playing games, it was the look of someone who had no other choice. He stood in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on him. Outside, the city glowed with peace, but Daniel knew inside the palace, danger was closing in. And now, whether he liked it or not, he was part of it. Daniel stood in the queen's chamber, the weight of her words pressing on his chest. He still could not believe this was real. Hours ago, he had been a simple engineer, worried about circuits and signal towers. Now, he was at the center of a storm far larger than himself. Queen Illyra paced slowly across the room, her robe trailing behind her like a river of silk. Her face was calm, but her hands betrayed her tension as they brushed against the carved surface of the wooden table. She looked at Daniel, her eyes sharp but also strangely tired. "My people doubt me," she said. "They whisper that I am weak. They wait for me to fail so that one of them can take my throne. By claiming you, I surprised them. They do not know what you are capable of, and their fear may give us time." Daniel frowned. "But I'm not capable of anything. I'm not a warrior. I'm not a leader. I fix things. That's all." She stopped pacing and stepped closer. "That is exactly why you are dangerous to them. You are unknown. My rivals cannot predict you, and that makes them hesitate. They wonder if there is some hidden strength in you, some secret power of humanity." He shook his head, almost laughing. "There's no secret. Humans are just people. We're stubborn, maybe, but I don't have powers. I don't have skills that could win a throne." Her gaze softened. For the first time, he saw something beyond the mask of the queen, something almost vulnerable. "You underestimate yourself," she said gently. "I saw how you acted in the hall. Surrounded by eyes filled with suspicion, you did not run. You stood your ground. That courage alone has value." Daniel sighed. He wanted to argue, but part of him knew she was right. He had been terrified, but he had not collapsed. Still, the thought of being her husband in name, even as a symbol, made his stomach twist. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Out of everyone in that hall, why choose me? You could have picked a noble from your own people. Someone with power. Someone they respected." Illyra looked out the tall window, her eyes fixed on the glowing city beyond. "Because they expect me to choose one of them. If I did, I would fall into their game. One noble house would gain favor, while the others would turn against me. But by choosing you, I gave no one advantage. You belong to none of them. You belong only to yourself." Daniel stood in silence, trying to understand her gamble. It was clever, yes, but also dangerous. She had thrown her fate onto him, a stranger she barely knew. If he failed, she would lose everything. He rubbed his forehead. "You put a lot of faith in someone who doesn't even understand your world." She turned back to him, her eyes steady. "Then you must learn quickly. If you walk beside me, you will face trials. My enemies will test you, and my people will judge you. But if you endure, they will begin to believe. Daniel swallowed hard. The thought of being tested by alien warriors or nobles filled him with dread. Yet, something in her words stirred a fire inside him. Perhaps it was her confidence, or perhaps it was the fact that his life now depended on her plan. Either way, he could not walk away. "What happens if I refuse?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Her smile returned, thin and sad. "Then they will see weakness. They will kill me, and they will not let you live either. You are too dangerous now, even if you do not see it. You have already changed the balance of power just by standing in that hall." Daniel's chest tightened. He had been dragged into something he did not choose, but he knew he had no way out. The choice was simple: stand with her and survive, or deny her and perish. He sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "I don't know how to play this game, Illyra. But if I have no choice, then I'll try." Her smile warmed, this time real and full of relief. "That is all I ask. Try, and I will guide you." The tension in the room eased slightly, but Daniel still felt a storm waiting beyond the palace walls. Somewhere in the shadows, enemies whispered and plotted. He knew they would not stay quiet for long. That night, as the city lights flickered in the distance, Daniel lay awake in his new quarters within the palace. His thoughts spun endlessly. He thought of Earth, of the quiet life he had left behind, of how simple things had been before. Now he was tied to a queen, tied to a throne, and tied to a world he barely understood. He closed his eyes, wondering what trials awaited him, and whether he would live long enough to see the truth behind the Queen's mysterious smile. The morning after the Queen's shocking declaration arrived with tension hanging in the air. Daniel barely slept, his mind chasing endless questions. By sunrise, he was escorted by guards into the throne hall again. This time, the hall was not filled with feasting nobles but with a circle of warriors and elders waiting in silence. Queen Illyra sat tall upon her throne, her calm eyes never leaving him. When Daniel stepped into the center of the chamber, whispers stirred again. One of the queen's advisors, an older alien with skin marked by faint silver lines, raised his voice. "If the queen truly claims this human as her husband, then he must show he is worthy. No outsider may sit at her side without proving his strength and his mind." Daniel's heart sank. He was no fighter. He had never trained with weapons, never faced combat. Yet he could see in the faces around him that refusing was not an option. Illyra's eyes softened as she looked at him. "You will not be asked to fight to the death," she said carefully, as though trying to calm both him and the crowd. "But you will be tested. These trials are not meant to kill you. They are meant to show who you are." The first test began in the training grounds. A circle of warriors surrounded Daniel, their armor gleaming. They were not ordered to strike him with weapons but to challenge his speed and resolve. One warrior lunged, expecting Daniel to crumble, but Daniel dodged clumsily, barely keeping his balance. Another charged, and instinct took over. Daniel ducked low, letting the warrior stumble past. The crowd gasped softly. He had not fought, but he had avoided harm. The warriors grew more aggressive, but Daniel relied on quick movements and clever tricks, using his environment. When one warrior pressed too close, Daniel kicked a pile of sand into his eyes, forcing him back. The watching nobles murmured, surprised by the strange tactics. When the trial ended, Daniel stood sweating and breathless, but unhurt. He had not won through strength, but through stubborn survival. Some laughed at his awkward style, but others nodded with respect. The second trial was one of intelligence. Daniel was led to a chamber filled with alien machinery, ancient and complex. The task was simple in words: restore power to a broken device that none of the Queen's rivals had managed to fix. To Daniel, however, it was familiar. He knelt beside the device, examining the wiring and the circuits. The aliens expected him to struggle, but Daniel's hands moved with ease. He saw where connections had corroded, where energy lines had been crossed. Using scraps and tools from his kit, he worked steadily. Within an hour, the machine hummed back to life, glowing with renewed energy. Gasps filled the chamber. For years, the nobles had considered the device dead, a relic of a lost age. Now it stood alive once more, brought back by the human they mocked. Illyra allowed herself the faintest smile, proud but controlled. She leaned forward on her throne. You see now? Strength is not always in the blade. Sometimes it is in the mind. The third trial was one of endurance. Daniel was led into a chamber filled with heavy stones, each larger than him. The challenge was not to lift them but to move them into a pattern before the sand in a great glass timer ran out. Warriors had failed before, their muscles giving way. Daniel, however, approached differently. Instead of trying to lift the stones with brute strength, he used levers and balance. He rolled them slowly, using physics rather than force. The work was grueling, sweat pouring from him, his arms trembling. But little by little, the stones moved into place. When the timer emptied, the last stone settled into its slot. Silence filled the room. Then, slowly, the nobles began to nod. The human had endured. He had not matched their warriors in strength, but he had finished what seemed impossible. By the end of the day, Daniel was exhausted, but he remained standing. The trials had not broken him. The people had seen his resilience, his cleverness, and his will. As the crowd dispersed, Illyra stepped closer to him. Her voice was soft, meant only for him. You see now why I chose you. Not for your sword, not for your title, but for this your refusal to give in, even when all odds are against you. Daniel met her gaze, still breathing hard. I only did what I could. I don't know if that's enough. Her smile returned, brighter than before. It is more than enough. Today you began to earn their respect. That night, as Daniel lay in his quarters, his body aching from the trials, he realized something strange. For the first time since the Queen had declared him her husband, he felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could survive this role after all. The days after Daniel's trials passed in uneasy calm. For the first time since the Queen had declared him her husband, people began to look at him with something other than scorn. Some still doubted him, but others whispered that perhaps the human was special after all. His survival in the trials had given the Queen's choice weight. But not everyone was pleased. In the dark corners of the palace, whispers turned into plans. The Queen's enemies had been waiting for a reason to strike, and now they had one. They could not allow her bold move to stand. To them, her choice of a human was not a sign of strength, but of recklessness. One evening, the palace filled with celebration. A feast was held to honor the successful trials. Musicians played, dancers moved in elegant patterns, and the nobles filled their cups with bright drinks. The hall was warm with laughter, though beneath it Daniel sensed tension. He sat near Queen Illyra, still uncertain about his role, but determined to remain steady. The Queen leaned close to him, her voice soft. Tonight may be dangerous. Keep your eyes open. Daniel nodded, his heart tightening. He tried to relax, but unease crawled through him. Every glance from the nobles seemed sharper, every laugh seemed hollow. Then, without warning, it happened. A servant approached with a silver tray, bowing low before the Queen. As Illyra reached for the cup offered to her, Daniel noticed the servant's hands trembling. His instincts screamed. Before he could think, he caught the Queen's arm and pulled her back. The cup slipped from the servant's grip, crashing to the floor. The liquid spilled, and within seconds, the stone beneath hissed as though burned by acid. The hall erupted in chaos. Guards rushed forward, seizing the servant, who fought wildly before being dragged away. Cries filled the air as nobles shouted at one another. Some demanded answers, Others pointed fingers, but all eyes returned to the queen and to the human who had stopped her from drinking death. Illyra stood tall, her face calm but her eyes burning with fire. "The rebellion dares to strike at my table," she declared. Her voice carried across the hall, silencing the crowd. She turned to Daniel, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And it is the human who saved your queen." The crowd murmured again, this time with awe. Daniel's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay steady. He had only acted on instinct, but that single moment had changed everything. That night, the queen summoned her closest advisors and Daniel to a war council. Maps were spread across the table, marked with symbols of enemy factions. Illyra's voice was firm as she addressed them. "They believe my bond with this human weakens me. They believe they can strike now and succeed. But we will show them their mistake." The advisors nodded grimly. Reports confirmed that rebel forces were gathering outside the capital. Armies of rival nobles were preparing to march. The assassination attempt was only the beginning. Daniel listened quietly, his stomach heavy. He was no soldier, yet here he was at the center of a war council. He wanted to speak, to tell them he was not ready, but Illyra's words earlier returned to him: "Play your part, or neither of us will survive." Finally, he spoke. "If they think humans are unpredictable, maybe we can use that. They expect me to fail, to be weak. But if I can help in ways they don't expect, it could make them hesitate." The advisors looked at him in surprise. One even scoffed, but Illyra raised her hand. "He is right. We will use their doubt as our weapon." Preparations for war began at once. The palace buzzed with activity. Messengers carried orders, blacksmiths sharpened weapons, and soldiers trained with renewed urgency. Daniel watched the alien warriors preparing for battle, their discipline and skill clear in every movement. He felt small among them, yet he also felt a strange determination. Later that night, as the city lay under curfew, Daniel stood with Illyra on a balcony overlooking the glowing streets. The wind carried the sound of distant drums. The rebellion was close. "You saved me," Illyra said quietly. Her tone was not the voice of a queen, but of a woman speaking truth. "You did not hesitate." Daniel gave a faint, tired smile. "I just reacted. I didn't want to see you harmed." Her eyes softened, and for the first time since he had met her, her smile carried no mask of politics. "Perhaps the stars guided me after all." Below them, the city prepared for war. Above them, the night sky stretched endless and cold. And between them, for the first time, there was not just duty but trust. The city did not sleep the night the rebellion marched. Drums thundered in the distance, echoing through the valleys that surrounded the capital. From the high walls of the palace, Daniel could see fires glowing far away, marking the camps of the queen's enemies. It was no longer whispers or hidden plots, this was war. Inside the palace courtyard, soldiers gathered in formation. Their armor gleamed under torchlight, their banners swayed in the wind, and their eyes were fixed on Queen Illyra as she stepped forward. Her presence was enough to silence the restless army. "My people," she called, her voice carrying across the courtyard, "tonight, the traitors come for your queen, for your homes, for your children. They believe we are weak. They believe a human's presence at my side makes us fragile. But together, we will show them the strength of unity. Together, we will defend what is ours." A roar of voices rose from the soldiers, shaking the very stones beneath their feet. Daniel stood beside her, his heart hammering. He had never been in a battle before. His hands shook, but he refused to step back. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, watching, judging, wondering if the queen's choice was madness or destiny. When the gates of the city thundered open and the enemy poured in, the night erupted into chaos. Steel clashed against steel, war cries filled the air, and the streets lit with fire. Daniel was swept into the heart of it. A guard thrust a short blade into his hands, though he knew he could not fight like the soldiers around him. Instead, he used what he knew best, his mind. As the battle raged, Daniel noticed the enemy pressing toward the palace towers where the city's energy cores were housed. If those cores fell, the city's defenses would collapse. He shouted to the nearby guards, pointing to the threat, and together they rushed to defend the towers. Daniel fought clumsily but with determination. He blocked blows, stumbled often, but never gave up. When an enemy cornered him, he threw sand into the warrior's eyes and shoved him aside. When another tried to cut him down, Daniel ducked and struck with the hilt of his blade, buying precious seconds until a guard finished the fight. But his greatest strength came not from the blade, but from his quick thinking. He noticed that the enemy used heavy siege carts, rolling them through the streets to break the palace gates. Daniel scrambled to one of the carts, crawling under fire and smoke, and found its weak point, the wheels. Using his toolkit, which he had refused to leave behind, he jammed the gears until the cart collapsed on its side. The enemy line broke in confusion, giving Illyra's soldiers time to push them back. Queen Illyra fought at the front, her blade flashing, her commands steady and fearless. Her people rallied to her call, but she kept glancing back at Daniel, as if making sure he was still standing. Every time she saw him rise again, covered in dust and sweat but unbroken, her resolve grew stronger. The battle lasted until the first light of dawn. By then, the rebellion was shattered. Their leaders were captured or fled into the mountains, their soldiers scattered. The capital stood bruised but unbroken. The people cheered as Illyra raised her blade in victory, her voice carrying across the field. Today we have shown that courage, not bloodlines, keeps a throne strong. Today we stood together and won. The cheers grew louder, echoing through every street. Daniel stood at her side, exhausted, every muscle in his body aching. Yet, when the crowd looked at him, they did not see a weak outsider anymore. They saw the man who had helped save their city. Later, in the quiet of the throne room, Illyra approached him. Her armor was marked with battle, her hair loose from the fight, but her eyes shone with pride. "You fought as if you were born among us," she said softly. Daniel gave a tired laugh. "I nearly died more than once." Her smile deepened. "And yet you lived. That is what matters. You have earned more than respect today, Daniel. You have earned a place among my people." He looked at her, realizing the truth of her words. He had not asked for this life, but it was his now. The people who had doubted him would no longer see just an outsider, they would see the human who stood with their queen in their darkest hour. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself to believe that maybe fate had led him here after all. The sun rose over the capital, casting golden light across the broken streets. Smoke still rose from the battle, but the city stood tall. The rebellion had been crushed. The people, once uncertain about their queen's bold choice, now looked at her with new respect. And beside her stood Daniel, no longer seen as just a stranger from another world. The palace courtyard filled with citizens, warriors, and nobles. They gathered to hear the queen speak, their voices quiet, their eyes waiting. Illyra stepped forward, her robe repaired but still marked by the dust of battle. She raised her hand, and silence spread across the crowd. "My people," she said, her voice steady, "you have seen what we faced. You have seen the traitors fall. They wished to break us, but they could not. And you have seen with your own eyes the one I named as my husband. He is human, yes, but he fought with us, he bled with us, and he saved me when death came close. Tell me now, do you still doubt him?" The crowd roared with shouts of support. Warriors raised their blades. Citizens clapped their hands together. Even some of the nobles who had once mocked him bowed their heads in respect. Daniel stood at her side, overwhelmed by the sight. He had not asked for this, had not planned any of it, yet here he was, part of a moment that would live in history. When the cheers finally faded, Illyra turned to him, her eyes shining. "Walk with me," she whispered. Together they moved through the palace, leaving the noise of the crowd behind. They climbed a tall staircase that led to the balcony overlooking the city. From there, Daniel could see the damage of the battle, the broken walls, the scorched streets, but he also saw people rebuilding, lifting stones, and helping one another. Illyra rested her hands on the railing, gazing out at her kingdom. "When I declared you my husband, it was meant as a shield," she admitted softly. "I thought your presence would confuse my enemies long enough for me to find my strength again." Daniel looked at her, surprised by her honesty. "So at first, it was only a trick?" She nodded, her expression serious. "At first, yes. But then you stood in the trials. You faced their laughter. You used your mind where strength failed you. You saved my life when poison touched my cup, and you stood in battle when others would have run. What began as a shield became truth. I see now what even I did not believe at first. You are not only my choice, you are my destiny." Daniel's chest tightened at her words. He had never thought of himself as anyone special. Back on Earth, he was just an engineer. But here, in this strange world, he had become something more, not through power or titles, but through courage and refusal to give up. "You give me too much credit," he said quietly. "I only did what I could." Illyra smiled, her eyes soft. "And that is exactly why you are worthy. Others boast of their power. You simply act, and through action you inspire." The two of them stood in silence for a while, watching the city awaken after its long night. Finally, Illyra turned to him, and for the first time, her smile was not for her people, not for her advisors, but for him alone. "You wondered why I smiled when I first declared you," she said gently. "I smiled because, in that moment, I felt the stars guiding me. I did not know how, but I knew you would change everything. Now, I see I was right." Daniel felt warmth spread through him. The fear and doubt that had haunted him since that first night began to fade. For the first time, he believed her words. Perhaps destiny had brought him here. Perhaps this strange path was always meant for him. Below, the people began to chant their queen's name. Then, slowly, they added his name as well. The voices rose together, carrying across the city like thunder. Daniel looked at Illyra, and she looked back at him. Her hand found his, firm and steady. The bond between them was no longer a mask or a trick. It was real. And as the crowd cheered, the queen of a kingdom and the human she had chosen stood side by side, ready to face whatever future awaited them. Illyra's smile that day was not just for her people. It was for him, the man who had arrived as a stranger and would remain as her husband, her partner, and her equal. The destiny she had spoken of was no longer hidden in mystery. It was here, alive in the bond they had forged through trial, courage, and trust. And for the first time, Daniel smiled back, knowing he had truly found his place among the stars.